Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this year's University of Missouri in St. Louis International Business Career Conference, which for this year, because of the circumstances, we've changed it to International Business Career Month. And so today is one of several activities that will be taking place over the course of the month. Today we have a panel discussion entitled Doing Business in a Post-Pandemic World. And I'd like to introduce myself first. I'm Steve Burrows, and I'll be the moderator of today's panel discussion. And I'm the retired CEO of Anheuser-Busch International, and I've been working with the International Business Department at UMSL for many enjoyable years. And it's really my pleasure to be your host today and welcome you to the conference. I also want to have send out a special welcome to the international partners of UMSL who are joining us today on the social media channel of the Business College here at UMSL. So welcome to those of you from China and Finland and Germany, South Korea and Taiwan. We welcome you and thanks for staying up late in some cases. So with that, let's get started. Of course, as everybody knows, since March of last year, practically every aspect of our lives, whether it was personal or professional, academic, you name it, every institution as we know it, was affected by the global pandemic COVID-19. And it affected the way everybody operated, both in their daily lives and in their professional lives. And so for our panel today, we have 4 senior executives from global manufacturing, consumer products, academia, and economic development who are going to share their experiences of how their business changed during the pandemic. And importantly, as it relates to today's panel, how they may operate differently in the future based on what they learned and what they had to do during the height of the pandemic. Now, we recognize it's not over yet, but there seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. It's certainly a more stable environment than what was the case 10 or 11 months ago. So as far as the process for today's panel is concerned, I'm going to be asking each of the panel members to give a brief background of their business and what the impact was on their business during the early months of the pandemic. Then I'm going to ask them a few questions for them to comment on and how they may change as they move their businesses forward and we come out of the most severe time for the pandemic. At the end of the discussion between myself and the panel members, we'll leave plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions, just go down to that little bottom part of your screen and submit a question in the Q&A box. And I'll be keeping an eye on those. And when we get to the Q&A section, I'll put the questions up for some of our panel members. So that's the way we're going to proceed. Let me introduce the panel members. First, we have Henry Evetts. Henry is the Vice President of Manufacturing for the HJ family of companies. HJ is a family-owned company with worldwide manufacturing and supply of electrical transformer, switch gears, and circuit breaker equipment for people who operate the electric grid. HJ manufactures in 3 countries. They have over 400 employees and customers around the globe in more than 45 countries. Henry himself is a vet of the United States Coast Guard, and we thank him for that service. He has many personal and professional interests, including the Boy Scouts of America, his church, and is a longtime member of the University of Missouri St. Louis International Advisory Board. So welcome, Henry. Next, I'd like to introduce Rodney Krim. Rodney is the CEO and president of the St. Louis Partnership, which is a regional economic development organization based here in St. Louis, Missouri. The organization provides attraction, retention, and expansion services, facilities innovation, and entrepreneurship for businesses, and actually owns and manages 4 business incubators of its own. Rodney has a long and expansive career in public and private sectors, serves on a number of local and national boards, all of which focus on improving life and economic development. Next, we have, welcome, Rodney. Glad to have you. Next, we have Mark Francoeur. Mark is the president of Coca-Cola Beverages Northeast. Coke Northeast is an independent Coca-Cola bottler and distributor of Coca-Cola brands and other beverages. They sell nearly 90 million cases of these beverages across 7 states in the Northeast USA. Coke Northeast employs about 4,000 associates, and Mark himself serves on several of the boards of the Coca-Cola Company based in Atlanta, the beverage industry, and is very involved in the community with several organizations, most notably the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And personally, I have the pleasure of sitting on the board of directors of Coke Northeast, so I have a special relationship with the company and with Mark. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Steve.
Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Joe Rotman. He's the Associate Dean of Graduate and International Programs and a Professor of Information Systems and Technology at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Joe has a long and impressive resume, which includes fellowships with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and the Center for International Studies. He's conducted numerous research projects and case studies with Fortune 500 companies, as well as the public sector. And he's published many articles in scholarly journals and books. So Joe, welcome today's panel.
Thank you, Steve.
So what do you say we get started with our discussion? And the first thing I'd like to do with each of our panelists is to ask them to comment on any other information they want to give us about their companies or their businesses or the work they do that might be important to the subject matter. And then tell us what some of their key learnings as they entered and were in the height of the pandemic a year ago. And what were some of the actions they had to take just to stay afloat, if you will, during the business? So that's the first question I'm going to put to the panelists. And Henry, I think I'll start with you on that question.
All right. Well, boy, it's hard to put a year's worth of information in a few minutes, but I'll sure give it a go. We're a little unique in the fact that with a business in China, it had to hit us earlier than it did most people here in the United States as far as, oh my gosh, this is real. Starting in China at the beginning, if you remember, nobody here had any idea that it was going to really affect us in the United States. But man, right off the bat, it's affected our plant in China. So one of the first things that happened was they were just desperate for masks. Myself, my team, my purchasing people, man, we're buying masks everywhere, going to Walgreens, going to Home Depot, buying masks and getting them over there as fast as we can, just to kind of protect our own people over there. And again, nobody thought it was going to come here. So we're talking January, February. Lucky for us, every year the Chinese New Year's happens in February. So we have, for many, many years, beefed up anything we source in China, anything we manufacture in China. We beef up our inventory December, January as a rule, which helped us through that point. Because actually, by the time we started seeing a lot here, they were already pulling out of it to an extent that they were back up to work. So with a little bit of luck there and the fact that we could source our other suppliers, beef up, buy domestically, we were able to limp along till now it starts going to Europe. Now it's coming here and we're going, oh my gosh, this is really going to affect us. We were deemed essential as part of the energy, culture that, we got to have electricity no matter what. So our business, our customers and our suppliers were all essential. So we didn't have to shut down. Now the real problem was, how do you stay open and be safe? Immediately put together a task force, HR, everybody, production, human resources, of course, were really involved, and the safety department. How can we work and not have an major outbreak here? I can say we've been very fortunate. We've had, of course, numbers of people coming and going on quarantine, staying away if they don't feel well, but we have not had a breakout here in High Ridge or our other plants that it actually started here and transmitted here. It's always been somebody's out because they were exposed to a family member or coworker who was exposed. So then it came, we needed masks. We needed all these things. Several of our employees' wives came up with, hey, we're going to make masks. And it was amazing, the response that everybody jumped, in time of need, people come to answer the call. And so we were having masks made by some of our wives, and did a fantastic job, because I pulled one here. Our masks, because we're working around machinery, had to have these safety pulls in case you get something caught. So the mask will actually snap apart, which, is kind of unique for manufacturers, because of normally you don't need that. But so just things like that. And our safety team, we did everything that everybody was doing. Temperature checking at all the stations. We secured everyone's badges so they could only enter the building after they've buzzed, and we let them in, go through the temperature question and the questions. All the real safety protocols we put into place. As things got worse, we actually kind of made a corporate contract with a testing site in De Pere, so that if we did have an employee who thought they were exposed, we could get a test very quickly and less downtime, than waiting to get into a test. We did all those things that, we could keep our business open, because, our demand was always up, like it always is. And we needed to keep going. The main focus was safety for our employees, of course. So, there's just a lot of scrambling around at our other offshore countries that we do business with. And we moved what we could back in-house manufacturing. A lot of the things we had manufacturers in China and Mexico used to be made here. All that equipment is still here. So we pulled on all the different angles we could. And actually, we had a few touchy times, but mostly we've done very well. Can't complain. Employees have stepped up, a lot of overtime, and our business is such where our machines are spaced normally 10 to 12 feet anyway. So we could social distance without a lot of effort. Just had to kind of make schedules and do protocols. But I hope I've answered your question, at least somewhat there.
Well, you did. I have one follow-up question for you, Henry, and it applies to all the members of the panel, but I'll ask you before I move on to the other guys. Did you have any employees who just felt like they shouldn't be in the work environment because of the situation, or maybe they had some underlying conditions that you had to deal with some very individualized personal issues?
Oh, exactly. Oh, we had a lot of those, and we still do. Some of our older employees were really worried. Of course, we worked with each one of them. If they could work from home immediately, hey, take off, and they did. And we still have people working remotely. Should have went into a little more of that. Our sales teams across the world are mostly all working from home, and anybody here who could. IT department had to really step up there. Most of them had laptops and everything already. But yes, a number of our employees just, for a while, we didn't have, your grandmother or your mother is watching your kids. So that employee couldn't come to work because their babysitter was not going, couldn't be exposed or whatever. So Yes, we had a lot of that, and we, of course, helped any way we could. Nobody was getting any points because they were absent during that time, and we had no real issues with that. Everybody was on board. Hey, how come they get to stay home? I don't, everybody understood.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point.
Well, thank you, Henry. Rodney, let me turn it over to you to deal with that first question, which is first, anything else you want to add about what you do and what the organization does, but more importantly, what kinds of things did you face when the pandemic began and was in full force?
All right. Thank you, Steve. And it's an honor to be here with you and our fellow panelists. And this is wonderful. It's really interesting that in another month, it is a year that we have been dealing with the pandemic. And part of our organization, we are a comprehensive economic development organization. So we are here to help businesses grow and expand, as you mentioned. And so one of the first things that we needed to do was to pivot, to identify ways that we could really help small businesses. We knew small businesses were going to really suffer much more than larger businesses, and that small businesses are the core of our communities. And so we knew we needed to help them. And so what we did was we initiated the Small Business Resource Program to get money out quickly to small businesses. We knew that the SBA programs, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, we knew that those were coming, but there was going to be this gap in time before those were really available. And we knew that businesses, specifically small businesses, needed help right away. So we were able to gather our partners together, work with local banks, and immediately put together like a $2.5 million fund that we could help with assisting small businesses with some kind of financial assistance and some additional support to help them know that somebody was there. We were there with them. We were going to provide information to them. We were going to help them through this crisis. But we were also trying to make sure our staff was up to speed, because just like everyone else, we went out remotely. And so we had to do those same things, which are try to make sure that our staff had the IT equipment, that we could provide all of those services that we would normally provide in person, that we could provide those remotely. And again, I'm very proud of our IT department as well, because they really stepped up, made sure our team was able to really work effectively remotely. And so that was really good. The other thing I'm really proud of is that as a community, we really came together. All of our economic development partners across the region, we kind of banded together. We tried to learn from one another. And we said, okay, what can we do to really help this region through this crisis? One of our sister organizations, the St. Louis Development Corporation in the city, also initiated a weekly discussion between all of the economic development organizations to share what we were doing, look at what businesses needed, get medical updates, and discuss other issues. And so that was really key. So helping people feel that no one was in it alone, that we were all working together. So that was really key. And that's been this process all the way through the pandemic. But we were very fortunate that when the federal government provided CARES funding through the states and to the local government, we were asked by St. Louis County to help distribute funds to, again, help small businesses. And these were in form of grants. And so working with St. Louis County executive leadership, the county executive, as well as the county council, we were able to work with an economic rescue team. The county executive established an economic rescue team. And this team was to help formulate different ideas and suggestions on how to help small businesses and how to help people enter and address the different issues that were occurring in the workforce. And so these working groups came up with a lot of different great ideas. Some are UMSL related to UMSL, some are related to St. Louis Community College. as well as a number of small business ideas. And through that process, working with St. Louis County, we were able to provide over $22 million to small businesses and other organizations to help groups through the pandemic. So, we needed to focus on our hardest hit communities. So we targeted a lot of things to North St. Louis County and North St. Louis City, as well as the south area of the county, which is Lime. And so with those areas, we made sure that a number of these resources were directed to those areas. We used these areas specifically in North St. Louis County and North St. Louis City is called the Promise Zone. And we're one of 22 federally designated promise zones in the country. And we're actually the largest promise zone. And what promise zones do is that they require you to work in collaboration, pull a number of groups together within a community, come up with some collaborative ideas and solutions to problems, and then we seek additional funding for those. And so with the Promise Zone, we were able to focus a lot of these resources in our most distressed areas. And so that was pretty important for us to hit it from a equity and inclusion standpoint, to make sure that these businesses, which are the kind of the anchors of our communities, did get the resources that they needed. And so with the Promise Zone, it's about 200,000 people in the Promise Zone, about 4,700 businesses, and we were able to use a number of resources, including people who are focused on that, like a social media influencer, people who people follow on social media. We put all of our information out there. In addition to our own website, stlpartnership.com, we had all of these other vehicles that we use to get the information out there. And so that was pretty important. But also we have another initiative called the St. Louis Mosaic Project, which is making our area more welcoming to foreign-born. And so this was an ideal opportunity for our Mosaic Project to work with all of our ethnic groups and to do translation and connect them to resources. And that really provided a lifeline for many of our small businesses and others going through the pandemic. So we were excited about the ongoing work of the Mosaic Project. We knew, and that restaurants are really hit hard because of this. A lot of them have resorted to curbside, a number of them have closed, and so on. So we work with the Restaurant Association to really direct a lot of resources to restaurants, again, to try to get them through the pandemic, and we still are continuing to do that, so that once we get out of it, they're still in existence and we can still help them. And so we appreciate the Restaurant Association for that. We had some consultants that we are hiring. We were finding the best resources we could to help small businesses. And some of those consultants were helping people prepare their applications for the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, and other programs that were beneficial to them. We also had a hotline so that, again, in addition to our website, stlpartnership.com, we had a hotline so people could pick up the phone, hear a voice, and that voice can direct them to resources. So we're excited about that. So with all of those programs, we were able to help about 2,300 businesses. And all together, you add all of the amounts that we contributed to small businesses and working with our partners to get to small businesses, is about $25 million to small businesses. And we still continue to do that. There'll be more stimulus packages. We'll still continue to help in that regard. But we also have Economic Development Administration loans and SBA 504 loans. We have a team that just focuses strictly on that. So even during this pandemic, we've been able to help companies expand, and they already had plans to expand prior to the pandemic. And these are kind of mid-sized companies to larger companies. And so again, if we direct people to our stlpartnership.com, they can hear about all of our programs. But we continue to really focus on helping businesses, and even doing that in a very creative way.
That's really great, Rodney. And I'm ashamed that as a St. Louis resident, I didn't know all the things that you were doing to help small businesses, and so important. I mean, the small business is the backbone of a community, and to see the impact on those small businesses was heartbreaking. So it's really good to know that you were there to help stand them up in the early days and the ongoing days. So just as a resident, thank you for that, for sure. Wonderful, great information. Why don't I turn to Mark Francoeur now and get a little insight to the Coca-Cola business and how you were impacted in those days, Mark.
Thanks, Steve, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning. What I'll do is I'm just going to share a little bit of an overview of our business, and then I'll talk about the effects of the pandemic on our business. And as Steve said, we're an independent Coca-Cola bottler. The entire U.S. system today is comprised of independent Coke bottlers. There's 67 of us out there. The great majority of our business is with the Coca-Cola brands, but not exclusively. We do sell brands of the Dr. Pepper Company and Monster Energy drink. And as an independent bottler, we're actually part of Kirin Holdings or Kirin Beer. And we've been a Kirin company for 44 years now, since 1977. So a long-standing relationship with Kirin Holdings. Our business continues to evolve in the non-alcoholic business. Today, we have over 500 different products and packages across a whole host of categories that we sell to our consumers and customers. I'm proud and pleased to say that brand Coca-Cola continues to be our largest brand and continues to grow, which is really exciting. But we sell brands like Sprite, Dasani Water, Smart Water, Powerade, Vitamin Water, Gold Peak, and a whole bunch more. But from a business perspective, as a Coca-Cola bottler, we go direct to the stores. So our customers, we have about 50,000 customers in our territory here in New England and the Northeast. And so we sell, deliver, and merchandise to store by store. So that means where we go to the largest Walmart supercenters, where we might spend upwards of a full day delivering and putting the products right on the shelf, to the small local deli where we might make a delivery a couple times a month to that customer. So we have a wide variety of customers, but we are direct to the customer and go direct to the stores. From a competitive landscape, it's not going to surprise anyone that Pepsi is our primary competitor. We compete pretty rigorously across our territory, both for market share in the soda business, revenue growth in the soda business, but also in terms of growth in these new and emerging categories like energy drinks, like sparkling waters and teas and sports drinks, where we also have new competitors, many smaller competitors coming into those fast-growing categories. So our business, like so many others, continues to evolve and change, and we're trying to stay ahead of that change as very best we can of that. But we're really fortunate to have a really strong portfolio of brands, again, anchored by brand Coke. Last thing I'll say is, Steve referenced at the beginning, we're about 90 million case business. That was 4 years ago, we were about 30 million cases. So part of a larger Coca-Cola initiative several years ago, the Coca-Cola Company divested of all of its bottling operations here in the U.S. And so the total U.S. is now serviced by independent Coke bottles, of which we're one. And they really did this for a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to stay and concentrate on brand building and marketing of great brands and have others, the bottlers, continue to do what we do, is bring those to life store by store. And also it was an opportunity to rework the contracts. Many of the Coca-Cola bottling contracts are over 100 years old. And as you might be able to imagine, they're not necessarily written and built for today's evolving marketplace. So that was part of the deal. We were fortunate to get an opportunity to expand our business throughout New England and upstate New York. And now, we sell over approximately 90 million cases of products there. So that's kept us busy over the course of the last several years. And then, as we were talking about, nearly a year ago, the pandemic came about. And so everything really changed for us. The first, inklings, we'd seen the news and know what was happening across, particularly across Asia and in Europe as the pandemic began to spread. But in those first 10 or so days of March, our business, particularly in the supermarket business, was like July 4th every single day, where the amount of consumer purchasing was just like you expected to be before July 4th. And there was just massive, pantry loading, shopping against that. And then, as we expected, that week of March the 9th, when everything changed, the week started normal. By Thursday of that week, most of the country was literally shut down. So, the things that we had to do, first of all, we had to go to our business continuity plan. How is our business continuity plan written? What was clear is that it probably wasn't positioned for the type of pandemic that we were facing in terms of how operations were going to be impacted. So the leadership team had to work with that. And kind of like Henry said, build that along the way to reflect the current nature of the pandemic. As some aspects of our business were still thriving, particularly in those early days, but then literally by the end of the month, literally almost half of our customers were not even actively doing business. So a massive change within that. The other thing that became really clear to us early on, whether it was in our continuity plan or how we were working with each other, is how incredibly important communication was. As things were changing at such a rapid pace, all of our team members wanted to hear from me, what were the things that were going on? How were we responding, to the crisis? There was a lot of uncertainty during those times. Our team members, as Steve said in one of the questions, some of them were very concerned about coming in on a daily basis there. And so really being active in our communication and how we were going about that. So that was really an important part for us. We also learned how resilient our business is. While some aspects of our business really were impacted significantly, overall our business was really resilient and stayed that way. It has stayed that way through much of the pandemic, which is really good. Our customers within that, I must say, have been very supportive because most of our customers, their team members are on the front lines as well, working in the stores day in and day out. So they know what our teams are going through and experiencing that. And they've been great. As sometimes our service, is a little bit later, a little bit different than what they might expect, but our teams have done the very best they can throughout that. And then, the last thing I would say is our team, just how great our team has been. I always say that our business is only as good as the people, that work in this business. And our team has been incredible during this time and really has proven that in so many ways, and just how resilient and resourceful our teammates are. And we wouldn't have been able to navigate through this challenge and this environment, as we have without the team. Yeah, we've had to make some changes in how we operate, for sure, in terms of the things that we're doing. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along, relative to some of the optimization efforts in terms of how we look at our overall business and some of the decisions that have needed to be made. Some of them have been quite difficult decisions and how we've had to approach that. So, but the team has been great. The last thing I'd say is, we have benefited from being part of a bigger Coke organization, where Henry had indicated having a little bit of visibility into the crisis, before it kind of became full blown here in the US. We'd had a chance to connect with our bottling partners in Europe in particular, and got a feel for what the impacts were on the business, how the consumer was responding, how the customer is responding, and some of the actions that they're taking. That helped us all along our way in our business continuity plan. So a lot has changed, and we've been able to gather some learnings from that we're going to take with us. And again, I'll share more about that as our discussion goes along.
Great, Mark. Thank you. There's a theme that's emerging here that I'm sure will carry through to when Joe makes his remarks, and that is how the people came together. I mean, Rodney, you mentioned it. Henry, you mentioned it. Mark, you mentioned it. Of course, I know your situation best of all, and it's really something to see that happen. And it really speaks to the caliber of our culture and of the people that we work and live with. It's just so impressive. And so that's really a common theme. Joe, how about your end? I mean, I know there was, huge impact when it came to the academic world. And so share your experience with us and anything else kind of about the structure or whatever you'd like to add to it.
Thank you, Steve. You know, it's hard to follow those three gentlemen on how you guys pivoted. If you think of a university, our model is a little different in that we don't ship our product to our customers. Our customers come here and pick it up, so to speak. And so when we learned that we would have to close the campus, you can imagine the disruption that could create to our students. And, you know, Mark, you had mentioned resilience, and Rodney, you'd mentioned pivoting. I think that the leadership on the campus, from the chancellor to the provost to our health officials, at the core of everything we did when we knew that we were closing our doors was that we wanted to make sure that the student wasn't harmed, right? Students have a schedule. They're at a university, they have deadlines, they have their own plans. And from the very beginning, when our university set up what they called unified command, and Mark, you had mentioned this, communication was really key. And everyone was faced to make decisions with incomplete evidence, right? We didn't really know what tomorrow would bring. And so our Chancellor, Kristen Sobolik, and our Provost, Marie Mora, they quickly established a communication outlet, and Unified Command was meeting daily to figure out exactly what we're going to do. And if I would go back in time a year ago, I would have said that what we were able to accomplish with pivoting to remote delivery to our 15,000 students across the region, I would have said, looking back, it would be impossible to do what we were able to do. And even though we did have a good percentage of our curriculum that was already online, we had many courses, many programs which never considered going online. If you think of biology labs, if you think of performing arts, you know, those are things that would be very, very difficult to pivot to online, but we were able to do it. And when I look at the faculty who never taught online, and they had about 2 weeks to figure out how do we keep the course going, how do we keep students on a path to graduation, it's astonishing what we were able to do. And what I think enabled us to manage this disruption not only was the communication, but it was really the resilience of our students as well, because not only are they our customers who would be impacted by the change in how we deliver our product to them, most of the UMSL students are employed at least part-time, and many of them in service industries. And as you know, those were hit so terribly hard at the beginning of the pandemic. People who worked in retail, who worked in hospitality, who worked in restaurants. And so our students not only faced, how am I going to graduate under these conditions, but how am I going to make money? How am I going to support myself and my family? And so the leadership really established a pathway. And within 2 weeks, we shut down the university, we moved everything online. And in most cases, without really missing a beat, it really was amazing what our faculty were able to do. And our students too, who maybe, as I said, in the performing arts or in wet labs and biology and chemistry, had to shut down experiments that had been running for months and figure out exactly what they're going to do. And so the innovation that I saw from our faculty and our staff really enabled this. Seamless is too strong of a word. There were bumps for sure, but we kept everything going and just completely pivoted to 100% remote delivery, both synchronous delivery, where we would have Zoom classes just like this panel, but then asynchronous, where faculty realized, well, they would need to record a lecture, which they've never done before. It was really kind of astonishing what we were able to do. And I'm so proud of the students and the faculty and the staff at UMSL for keeping things running. And I know we'll get to this later, but I think that there are going to be permanent changes to higher education as a result of this pandemic. We're not going to go back to where we were. And through the innovations that our faculty and our staff made, we're going to be able to deliver a better product to a wider range of customers now, because we had the necessity, and so we created the invention. And so I think that's it kind of wraps up what UMSL did at the beginning of the pandemic, Steve.
Joe, thanks. I think your description of our customers come to us is maybe obvious, but in some ways not, and how that changed your world overnight, basically, to the point where my customers can't get here. That's pretty impactful. That would be like Mark having to shut down all of his distribution centers overnight and not go to his customers. And the same with Rodney and with Henry. So it's a striking impact. Joe, just out of curiosity, today, what's the approach? Is it a combination, or are you still 100% virtual?
It's a combination. And so, one of the challenges with the pandemic, and if you think of a classroom, if you're going to put a circle of 6 feet around every person in a room, your capacity to deliver goes way down, because a room that had 30 chairs can maybe now seat 10 students or less, depending on the ventilation and other area hallways and things like that. So we moved from any class that had a capacity of bigger than 30, went 100% remote. And so just because we didn't have rooms big enough, I mean, we do have large lecture halls, but even with a large lecture hall, you can't fit that many socially distanced students. And so we are moving back to looking at the summer, we'll have the same rules, but in the fall, we're going to be able to remove some of those, what we call the COVID caps, and allow a little bit more face-to-face teaching. So right now we're blended, but we're slowly easing the restrictions on some of those requirements.
Good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Those are all great backgrounds on how this affected you in the beginning and how it's affected you, for the past 12 months. What I'd like to probe a little bit more now is, I know in the Coca-Cola business, just because I'm familiar with it, we learned some things, and we're going to continue to do some things that we learned because they're the right thing to do, whether it's for our employees' safety or whether it's for the satisfaction of our customers or for the efficiency and profitability of the business. So I'd like to pose this question to the panel members, and that is, what are you doing differently or plan to do differently on an ongoing basis as we move through the most painful point of the pandemic, and hopefully to a point where things begin to return to a sense of normalcy as vaccines are distributed and administered. So the focus of this question is, what are you going to do differently as you move ahead, either because you think it's the right thing or because you learned you could do it during the pandemic? And Henry, again, I'll start with you. If you would take a few moments, take your time, there's no rush. We've got some questions coming in, but we'll certainly get to them. So Henry, tell us what, if anything, you'll be doing differently as you move forward.
Oh, definitely going to be a lot of things that we will continue to do after this is over. We've learned a lot. For us, since we're a manufacturer, we need raw materials, and our raw materials and our sourcing teams are around the world. So for us, we need more sources. In some cases we're single source, some cases we may have 2 sources on things, but we're exploring multiple sources in multiple countries. Because as this hit, China was affected first. So anything coming from China, we had to do some scrambling. But it's always been our practice, since our product comes over in containers, takes 4 to 5 weeks usually to get a container, that we call it dead inventory. We've always kept 2 months worth of inventory on anything we buy offshore. And that is, we call it dead inventory because it just sits there. And, we'll replenish it, but we keep that in just in case a container is lost at sea or whatever. But we have learned now we have to make sure we have multi-sources on raw materials. And also, since we're manufacturing in Mexico, China, and here, we got to really make sure there's duplication of efforts there. If, say, there's an outbreak of something maybe not pandemic, but say it just affects Mexico, that we've got to be able to produce those same items here or in China. It's just a matter of really looking at planning. Boy, be prepared is the old motto, right? That if something happens in one part of the world, it doesn't shut us down. So inventory is huge. We'll also just inventory more items and make sure that we can produce at each location most of the products we make. The other thing is just the communications. We've talked about all these Zoom meetings. Those are something that we're going to probably do more of just as a general practice. We always did some Skype meetings and things, but we've realized that maybe we don't need that office of 2 or 3 employees, say in Barcelona, where they can actually work remotely. And since it's mostly all sales and quoting and things like that, there's no manufacturing there. Maybe we can leave that office closed and just, set them up a little more in their homes, or so they can, we don't really need that physical office. So we're learning those things. Maybe we can streamline a little bit here and there. And that's a biggie too. We do a lot of, our salespeople do a lot of sales calls to customers all over the world. And that has also gone to a lot of Zoom. It probably, just like Joe would say, it's not the same. You need that face-to-face, just that face-to-face meeting to get to know your customer a little more, make it a little more personal. In a Zoom meeting, we get the business done, but we don't develop a relationship. We don't get down to the level sometimes of, hey, I know your wife had an operation, how's she doing? And that is so important in business with us. It's a partnership, and you lose that with all the Zoom. And I know I have 9 grandchildren trying to do the Zoom meetings and all the education, and they all tell me it's just not the same. We can't, it's not as personal. I didn't get a chance to ask this question, or so we're all anxious to get back. But there are, in some cases, with time zone changes and that, we did our annual sales meeting. We usually bring everybody from around the world into High Ridge here for a week, and we had 50 people on this Zoom meeting. Man, my screen looked like the old Squares TV shows, but it was unbelievable. And that's such a team building experience for us every year. Where we go to Top Golf and we do dinners, but our team, as I think Mark was saying, just unbelievably come together with ideas, and you just got to hand it to them. Somebody said, well, let's do a rock, paper, scissors thing. It's for entertainment during our week. I'm going, and we give away, some little IT gift, but it was amazing. We did elimination rounds and everybody had a great time. And, it's amazing how you adapt. And I can't give enough credit to our team as well. And to this day, they're still coming up with innovative ideas and ways to get it done. But a lot of those things we'll continue to do. Travel will really take a hard look at how much travel we do and how much is necessary. And you just got to be prepared at all different angles. For us, raw material, of course, is huge. And as the tendency was automation in our business. So, we continue to do that, which really helps us. So if there isn't a problem with the pandemic, less employees we have to bring in, we're going to do and adapt and learn from this like everyone. But raw materials and sourcing is probably the 2 biggest areas we're going to concentrate on.
Yeah, and that's, people may not think about this, but when you're building inventory, as you refer to as dead inventory, I think, that's a cost to the company. You've got to carry that inventory on your P&L, and that affects the profitability of the company. It affects all the things that are associated with that get right down to the employee eventually. So that's a commitment that it sounds like you're going to have to make, just so that if something bad happens in the future, you can deal with it. Good.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I mean,
Go ahead.
we just can't operate without the inventory. So, and that takes a lot of maintenance to that program. Some product lines may not be as active as they once were, so you got to constantly look at those numbers and how much of this you're going to keep, how much of that. And it can get away from you if you just keep piling up stuff and don't realize how much you have in inventory.
That's right. Great. Those are great comments, Henry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Rodney, how about in the economic development world? Did you learn anything that you want to carry forward? I'm sure you did.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. You know, before the pandemic, we were looking at our office space and trying to determine what was the best, most efficient layout for our staff. And so since the pandemic and working primarily remotely and everybody being super efficient at that, you know, we'll be looking at is there some type of hybrid model or something like that as we go forward in terms of what our actual physical space needs are. And as Henry said, you know, we've been also doing those kind of things where we can bring our people together, even remotely. I mean, what our HR crew, they have an employee committee, and that employee activities kind of committee said that we should have something where it's just a very casual thing. They call it social 30. So for 30 minutes, like a week, anybody can sign on and they'll just do fun things that get to what Henry was saying, learn a little bit more about what's happening with individuals, what's happening with their families, different interests and activities that they have. So it's really a way of kind of keeping our people close and providing an outlet for them. I talked a lot about small businesses in the earlier question. So, you know, we now know a way to make sure that we provide goods and services to small businesses to really help them. And so we'll continue to build on that. As we talked about, they're the anchors of our communities. So we're going to continue to figure out ways to become even more and more efficient on how to get resources to small businesses. We heard a lot about teams with our organization, working across organization and teams, working with our partners outside of the organization in terms of teams. We have a phrase that others have heard before, teamwork makes the dream work. And so that is true. And so we've been just doing a lot of things collectively. But one of the things we've been doing with our partners is really doubling down on business retention and expansion, recognizing that understanding the businesses and what their needs are, and then how to address those needs. And we've been partnering with our economic development and utility partners across the region to really just have a great program, a real robust program to do that. And Henry, we're going to reach out to you too, because we love manufacturing. We have an initiative called the Regional Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, and I'm sure you've probably heard of it, but we really want our manufacturing companies and all companies to be successful. So we'll be reaching out to you. Steve, you know a little bit about our World Trade Center. A number of your audience might not know, but our World Trade Center is always looking at opportunities for foreign direct investment. How do you help companies reshore, like Henry was talking about, making sure that those goods and services are here and accessible for all of our companies. So our World Trade Center is under our St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, and they're doing some great things. And they have a number of wonderful events. And so some of these events had to go to personal or virtual this year versus in person. And so, but there were some benefits to that. For example, our Growing Global event that's held annually always has record attendance, even had higher participation this year. And one of those reasons was that we had Gary Kelly, Chairman and CEO of Southwest Airlines, to speak at our annual Growing Global event. So with the virtual, and I think Henry mentioned this and others mentioned this, we've all had to kind of pivot to virtual, but we've been able to get access to people we probably wouldn't have normally gotten access to, and kind of hear their stories, and with their stories then be able to help our businesses here. Our World Trade Center is also doing a Re-Engage in Trade series. how to help companies think about re-engaging in international trade. So we'll continue to kind of look at what things need to be in person and also what things can be done virtually. And so I think we're all developing a high level of confidence that we can pivot and do whatever's needed to address these changing times. So we're excited about the potential opportunities.
That's great, Rodney. I wanted to ask you a question because you're close to a broad cross-section of the business community with the type of work you do. And I'm just curious, what's your sense of the attitude among business right now? Are they optimistic? Are they worried? You know, how's the business climate out there from your perspective?
I think the business climate is positive. I think that a number of businesses have been, just like the fellow panelists, have been able to pivot and look for opportunities even in the midst of the pandemic. Not only how to take care of their own staffs, but also how to deal with their customers and what their customers' needs are. Who knew that, the delivery trucks would be on the streets like 5-10 times a day, dropping things off at people's homes remotely. I think everybody's gotten to know their delivery folks quite well during this period. But, I think everybody's just, the successful companies pivoted early. They said, okay, we got to deal with this like right now. We got to work our way through this. What can we do that's different? I'll give you an example of a small company. So this is like a doggy daycare kind of company. This is a little small business. And so doggy daycare says, okay, now people are concerned about bringing their pets to us. And again, with social distancing and masking and all of the required requirements. And so this company comes up with a bus, retrofits a bus that can go and pick up the animals, your favorite pets, the extensions of your family, and actually start providing that service from your door to the doggy daycare, bring them there, deliver them back, that type of thing. But that's creative. That was coming up with something creative, like right away. Our large companies, we have a couple of distributors, Mark, here in our area too, and they've still been growing. They have plans for expansion. We've been helping them with incentives to go ahead and expand and add on to their facilities. So I don't think people are really stopping. They're just kind of looking at things and saying, okay, how do I need to adjust this a little bit differently? But it's still a positive movement.
Great, Rodney. Thank you for that. Mark, what sorts of things do you think you'll be doing differently over at Coke Northeast as you move forward?
Yeah, no, I think good question. And as I mentioned, our position as a new and larger company, a few years back, put us in a position where we were really trying to get our company aligned and optimized across the organization in terms of redundancies and looking at bringing three companies together as one. And we had made some progress in that area, but quite honestly, we maybe hadn't made as much progress as we should have made. Last March, everything changed and we needed to make progress faster. The environment, called us to take action swifter, and we were able to do that. We made massive adjustments to our operation, at the onset of the pandemic. As I said, at some point, nearly 50% of our customers weren't actively doing business, and we had to make some tough decisions around positions. We had to temporarily reduce several positions. We had to look at our entire operation. And that has come back in a meaningful way over the course of the last several months as businesses have returned. But there's also been a lot of learnings in there, and how do we do things differently, and how can we do things differently to make sure that our positions and resources are allocated against where the business is. I'll give you a couple of examples. I'd mentioned earlier from a product assortment, we had about 500 different products, packages of all the brands that we have. At the height of the pandemic, we were down to about half of that, around 250, and yet our actual volumes were fairly stable during that period. Massive change in how that went about. So the concept of just automatically going back and bringing all of those 250 different products back into our portfolio with the cost of carrying that and the like is something that we've scrutinized very heavily, and we're bringing a lot of them back, but we're not just automatically bringing them back because now we're being more disciplined in our analysis of that. You mentioned the trucks that are going through everyone's neighborhood. You talk about online and you talk about e-commerce. Our business really hadn't been that strong in that area. Our packages are sort of heavy, not a big online business. That's changed a lot over the course of the last 12 months. And if we're going to continue to grow and be where the consumers are and how they're purchasing our products, we're going to have to be better in that. So as we look about how we're allocating our resources, and like a higher focus on digital e-commerce system-wide, so that we're in a better position to be where the consumers are engaging our products around that. We talk about communications. Both Rodney and Henry mentioned that, just vitally important that we look at how do we communicate. I think it's fair to say that we will continue on with some of these, Teams and Zoom meetings going forward. Not all. I mean, I think you can't replace face-to-face, but in terms of finding ways to be more efficient in things that we're doing, we'll continue to build upon that and look at ways that we can be more efficient in that. Henry also mentioned supply chain. One of the challenging outbreaks of this pandemic is that consumers, as they purchased most of their beverages in the home, as opposed to a better balance between in-home and away from home in the restaurants, there's been an aluminum can shortage that has had a significant impact on the industry in terms of, so as we look at it now, our supply chain teams have spent a disproportionate amount of time working to secure, making sure that we have the right amount of raw materials so that we can continue to satisfy consumer need. But that's something we've had to really heighten our awareness on, and is that we do a lot of that system-wide and really put a focus on that in multi-year plans, so that we can continue to look at things in a way that's we're out front of that. So in case these things continue, the supply chains continue to be pressed in the years ahead. The last thing I'll say on this, and Steve, you're familiar with this, at the onset of the pandemic, our CEO of Kieran Holdings, a gentleman by the name of Lee Sasaki-san, really encouraged all of his management team to look at the business in the form of an accelerate, change, stop, and reduce manner. Meaning, really look at the actions that you're taking. Should you accelerate that? Should you do more of that? Should you change actions that you're taking in terms of being efficiency? Are you doing things that are redundant and not necessarily adding productivity, and stop those? Or are there some actions that you can do less of and reduce those? So I really tried to instill that mindset across our entire operation against that mindset. But we'll continue to approach opportunities and look at things differently. But in terms of where we were as a company, this has really kind of, really jump-started us to make sure that we're looking at the business in a way that we need to look at it to be successful in the future.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate those comments. Joe, you alluded to it before that things are going to not be the same. What sorts of things is UMSL or education in general, from your perspective, going to be doing differently?
Yeah, I think, if you look at higher education as an industry, we're certainly, we wouldn't be considered as highly innovative, right? So we have kind of legacy and we have traditions. And I think what we've realized during the pandemic is the value of innovation in higher education. And we were kind of forced to do that. And once we recognized that we could keep the quality, and in many cases improve the quality, and yet change the delivery modes and the flexible course schedules and the different types of assignments and engagements that we would normally have in the classroom that were now moved to Zoom. I think if we look back, I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. And the faculty and the staff have really embraced the transformative technologies that are really going to change our delivery models. If I think about things like student advising, it was before the pandemic, it was pretty much, you went to campus, you sat across the desk from your advisor, you picked your classes, you figured out how your path to graduation. And on the undergraduate side, we were fairly electronic already prior to the pandemic. We had electronic student records. But in our graduate program, because most students' path to a Master's of Accounting or Information Systems or the MBA or Doctor of Business Administration, a lot of those were kind of one-off programs for that student, depending on what they brought from a previous institution and their goals. And so on the graduate side, we were still paper-based. So when you went to your advisor, they went to the filing cabinet, they pulled out a file, and there were their handwritten notes from the last time you met. And we had about 2 weeks to basically scan every document of our 500 graduate students, so that once the campus closed, we could still help our students. And so we're never going back now to paper files, right? We were forced to innovate, and the team was really amazing at figuring out new processes and strategies to help the students. And so even in course delivery, personally, one of the courses that I teach is an information systems capstone class for our IST majors. And if you had asked me a year ago, could I ever do that class online, the way that it's structured and that we have real clients and teams and the writing of the code and all of that, I would have said no. No, that class, that's always going to be face-to-face. It's going to be in the classroom. It's actually working really, really well through Zoom, and it is more efficient. It is, for our students, it's a lot easier to have team meetings and meet with the clients. You know, we've improved the quality through innovation. So things will not go back to normal. And I think that it's really amazing how innovative our faculty have been.
Yeah. That's great, Joe. Thank you for that. And we've got, I guess we've got about 20 minutes or so, and we have some questions coming in. So they should be on your screens too, but I'm going to sort of do the distribution of the questions. Joe, here's probably a couple for you. One is, do you see more courses being offered because of the more remote curriculum than in the past? And then so the second question is, what kind of advice would you have for students who are about to graduate and will be looking for employment opportunities?
Yeah, I'll take the second one first. And you know, what was interesting, I teach primarily information systems students, and what they were required to do was to really kind of convert their learning to the same kind of model that many IS professionals have as their career. Many IS professionals have no office. They work remotely, and that's just the way that work gets done. And so they were forced to explore that mode of delivery prior to getting a job. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities for students, and Mark, you used the word resilient. You know, the resiliency of our students is going to be something that they can certainly highlight and put a spotlight on during the job interviews, of how they were able to keep going, to keep progressing, to keep their GPA up, to keep their jobs and still move towards graduation. And so it really highlighted the resiliency of our students. And I wouldn't underestimate, from a student's perspective, what it took to keep going. And if they're able to articulate the grit that they needed in the job interviews with examples of how, well, you know, my kids couldn't go to daycare, so we set something up in the home and things like that, in order to keep progressing. I think there's a really good opportunity for students to really use this almost as a personal branding issue of how they were able to keep going.
And how about any additional courses? Do you think that'll happen?
I think that our delivery models will continue to evolve, and courses will continue to move both synchronous and asynchronous online, as well as recognizing, as Henry and Mark and Rodney mentioned, that there is still value in face-to-face, and understanding what works well remote and what doesn't. For many students, highly quantitative classes, if you look at the finance, the accounting classes, some of the supply chain and analytics classes, many students still really need to sit across the desk from a professor and with their teammates to understand, you know, complicated formulas or things like that. And so we can't underestimate the value of face-to-face, but then the flexibility in keeping the quality, we're going to see it continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think Rodney said it interesting before. I think we all agree, and Henry said it, and Mark has said it, we all agree that wouldn't it be great if we could start shaking hands again? And we miss, I guess as humans, we just miss that personal connection. But at the same time, as Rodney said, there's some things you can do remotely now that would have been much harder to do in the past because you have greater access to people who don't physically have to come to you, like the speaker from Southwest Airlines. So it's kind of managing those opportunities, those needs and those opportunities that are going to be important. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Here's a question.
Hey, Steve, I was just gonna
Rodney,
tag on to that if you don't mind.
Please
So
do.
as you mentioned earlier, we have 4 business incubators, and as you just mentioned, a lot of those, the way incubators work, people kind of bump into each other. They come up with these ideas, and they say, okay, I'm thinking about solving this problem, and somebody else is able to contribute to that. And so with our incubators, we've been trying to, as we look forward, how do we kind of keep that essence of what a business incubator really does within our environment, as well as make sure there's a lot of good safety and protocols in place. And we're in a nice area because in addition to those 4 incubators, we also oversee the 39 North Innovation District, and that's the highest concentration of PhD scientists in the country. And so they're, again, looking at how do they connect with one another virtually or in person to kind of keep ideas and that innovation going to just help solve a number of ag tech problems and deal with the world's food insecurity. So you're right. It's always this kind of balance of how do you do that?
Good point, Rodney. Here's one I think I'm going to toss over to Mark. It's from Ellie, and she says, how do you manage the hiring process during the pandemic? And were there any particular obstacles that your HR department had and which they had to overcome? So, Mark, any comments on that?
No, thanks. Thanks for the question. One of the things when we talk about an effective remote workforce, that has really allowed us to I wouldn't say not miss a beat on it, because I'm sure, out there's some challenges. Things might take a little more time from some of the background and approval processes might be more, a little bit more time consuming than in the past. But the team has been able to stay very, very effective in that area. Our turnover has been fairly stable, hasn't really reduced, hasn't really accelerated there. So we've been able to continually, hire effectively around that. We're still seeing good candidates across most of the openings that we've had. So we've been fortunate that with effective remote working and in here, while some of the talent acquisition team is in here, we've been able to do that. Now, you do miss a little bit where you're not able to, I think, again, it's fair to say we're not able to see the individuals, shake the individuals' hands and do that, but you've been able to really get a good perception of the candidates through these types of meetings and the like. So I would say overall, it's been okay. I think it's something that will maybe move back a little bit more balanced to face-to-face and or virtual as things stabilize in the months ahead. But overall, I'd say it's gone about as well as we could have expected.
Great, thanks, Mark. Here's one for you, Henry. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but it may be worth revisiting. And the question is there any big impact for doing business abroad during the pandemic? And among the group here, you've got a pretty global footprint. So what's your view on that?
Well, we are operating in so many different countries and different time zones and different cultures. There's not a whole lot of change that I can see or things that we need to do differently, except just really be on the lookout for as a pandemic or any other crisis would be to be able to ship our product to all these different countries and make sure that we have the raw materials and the people in place. I'm not sure exactly what the question, give me a little more on what it.
Well,
what-
it's the question is, I lost it. It got answered. Basically, the question was, what impact has the pandemic made on your ability to conduct your global business? It might have been different than it was before. And I think you
Well-
answered that before when you said, well, one of the things we learned is we need multiple suppliers. We need a little bit heavier inventory of items so that if we have a problem, we've got the inventory to satisfy our production demands. I think you've covered that.
Yeah, and just diversify and just look at all options. And it's
Yeah.
amazing if one option closes, you come up with a new one. But
Yeah.
being flexible is a big part of that.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mark, here's a good one for you. You've got probably the most employees, I'm guessing, of the panel members. And the question is, how do you keep the morale of your employees positive with a lot of them struggling big time during the balance of work, family, remote learning for their kids, and what have you? What's been your experience with that? And I know your team is very motivated and but that didn't happen by accident.
No, it's a really good question. And one of, as I said in my comments, it's around our people. Any success that we have is going to be around the folks. And it has been tough. And, some folks are rightfully so much more concerned than other folks, depending upon their individual situation. But our teams, we've stayed, particular across all of our facilities, communication, as I said, from myself and to our teammates, continuing to engage our teammates on a regular basis to understand how they're doing. I think our teams, particular at the end of last year, really, recognize we've done a lot to try to recognize the work that our teams have done through some different ways, means of recognizing them financially and others, to try to recognize the good work that they've done, and then listen, do the best that we can to listen. But at the end of the day, we are a business. We're very fortunate that it's ongoing business. It's been fairly stable like this. It's changed relative to how our business comes in, but we need our folks working, and we do the best we can relative to flexibility. But the great majority of our teammates are working across the marketplace day in and day out, and constant communication, support, and hearing their needs and doing the best that we can to address them in as timely manner as we can.
Yeah, I'm gonna, just because I know due to my familiarity with the company, I'm gonna add a couple of things because Mark is too humble to say it himself. Almost immediately, the company increased the hourly pay of the drivers that were going in and out of retail accounts. Think about these ladies and gentlemen are going in and out of 20 accounts a day, grabbing door handles and freezer handles, and really on the front line, trying to service the customers. And Mark and his team almost immediately increased their pay by a significant amount to recognize, the risk that they were putting themselves at. And then at the end of the year, when the company got through this and actually did quite well, the company, led by Mark and his HR department, gave special bonuses out to all the employees, 4,000 employees, many of whom had never gotten a bonus in their life, right before the holidays, in recognition of what they had committed themselves to. And I'm sure the rest of the panel members have done similar things where they could. But for the attendees at the meeting, it's important for you to understand that these are companies and leaders of companies that recognize the value of their people, and that value deserves special recognition, not just a pat on the back, but sometimes a little more money in the pocket as well. Let's move on. We've got a few more questions here. Let me see here. Here's a good one. Maybe this is for Rodney or Joe. I'll let you guys take turns on this one. In a post-pandemic area, do you think students need to develop new skills to be competitive? And so, Rodney, you can give it from the professional side of what companies might be looking for, and Joe, you can give it from the academic side. So I'll go to you first, Rodney.
All right. No, thank you, Steve. So, one of the first things that companies say when we're working with them about expansion or attraction with our partners to this area is the talent pipeline. What does the talent pipeline look like? And so we're working with all of our university and workforce providers to make sure they understand what businesses are looking for. And those communities that are doing really, really well across the country are those that are really paying attention to making sure that there's a connection between certification programs, degree programs, reaching all of our communities people in our most challenged areas as well as our most affluent areas, just recognizing and identifying individuals that can fill that pipeline for these companies. Companies don't want to locate where there's a weak pipeline. And so you got to make sure that there's a good talent pipeline. And everyone's not going to go to college. So you have to provide a number of alternatives, not only college, but certifications, training programs, working with the various trades, et cetera. So that's key. And we have a couple of initiatives within our region to try to address that, but that's what companies want. And that's going to make our region much more successful by really being able to nail down on that.
Thanks, Rodney. Joe, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I think, post-pandemic, the emphasis will still be on the technical skills of graduates. So depending on the particular functional area that our students are in, marketing or management, accounting, finance, things like that. But I think the pandemic has really focused a lot more on the soft skills, and with the so much going on virtually, the ability to manage your own messaging and to be able to get your point across far more quickly and succinctly than you would if you had a face-to-face meeting. And like Henry said, where you have the social aspect, I think our students are developing a much more targeted delivery model of what they're doing with their own knowledge and their capabilities, with interviews and screening interviews being now in Zoom for their first or second positions. The ability to clearly articulate the value that the student is going to bring to that position. I see our students getting better and better at that messaging.
Yeah, and I think the being force-fed Zoom calls or WebEx or whatever has helped students be better communicators, because there's more demand for them to be engaged and to be comfortable in that speaking environment. And that's personally something I think is good for the students to get comfortable with.
And especially if you look at something like this IB Appreciation Month, that the students and Professor Lane, Professor Gao, and Renita put this all together. Normally it would be all face-to-face planning. And so they were forced to plan a virtual event virtually. And they did a great job with getting the, like this panel lined up and the keynote, and even fundraising increased because of the virtual nature of some of these activities. Yeah. And I think our students are also being forced to be more creative. For our international students and our international business majors, having an international experience, it takes a lot more creativity to be able to have the cultural exposure like that Henry talked about. And so our this career conference, our case competition, some of the partnerships we have, our students are really getting creative at being able to sustain the value that they have.
Great. Well, we're moving to the end of our panel discussion. So a couple things. On the question and answer box, there's one that's directed to you, Henry. You can type the answer in yourself, and there's also one for you, Rodney. I'll let you guys handle that. The way I'd like to end this is with what I think is a really good question here. It's from James, and I'd like each of us to comment on this. What factors do you think are the most important for your organization to grow during the pandemic? And so as you look forward, we've talked about some of the changes you've made, but from a 10,000 foot level, what are the things that you think are going to be most important for the organization to grow? And let's start with you, Henry. Anything come to mind as far as the things that are going to be important to continue or increase the growth rate over at HJ?
Well, it's a little different for us. We were on a pretty steep growth rate already. So for us, it's just a matter of, I hate to keep going back to it, but we have got to get the supplies and the raw materials and that. And of course, we've talked about employee retention, and that's key for us. Boy, a lot of in our foundry, for instance, you have to have at least 8 or 10 people show up and be here to run a foundry line. And so we've learned, and I think one of the most, going forward, to answer this particular question, is cross training for us. We have a number of employees who are what we call a machine operator, production people. And if something goes wrong with their machine or it needs to be switched over to a different product, the setup person has to come over and maybe switch a mold or this or that. Well, during this whole pandemic, we realized that, hey, we need to make each of our employees a little more familiar with that whole process. Because if the setup guy isn't able to show up, wow, we can't run that product. So we've created a whole new position about halfway through this. That's a setup operator. And it's amazing how we found that this operator, who was pretty well just put in, take out, use gauges, blah, 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 they have a lot more to offer. And we've recognized that and increased wages accordingly. Now they can come in and they can set up their own machine and then run their own parts. And for us to go forward in the future, that's a big thing for us, to be able to have our operators be more flexible, more cross-trained, and be able to be more productive.
Great. How about you, Mark? What do you see as kind of the high-level important things you're going to have to do?
Yeah, as I listen to the question and listen to Henry's comments, I think flexibility. As I look at our business, I'm very optimistic about our future in terms of the potential for growth and the like, but it's going to continue to evolve. As I mentioned, some of the different channels of business and how we're going to go to market, the different categories of business. So I think starting with myself and across all of our people, be able to have an open mind, a clear set of North Star guiding principles that are going to guide us, but be flexible and innovative, and then solid in our communications across the organization, because we're not going to be able to do things the same way and achieve the results that I think are possible. But we're going to have to be able to collectively work together to recognize that we're going to have to do things differently. Some going to be very similar, but other things are going to have to be very innovative and different. And if we do that and do that effectively, I'm very optimistic about how we can continue to adapt to our changing environment and be very successful within that.
Thank you, Mark. Rodney?
Yeah, and I quickly want to answer Charlotte's question. Charlotte, stlpartnership.com, stlpartnership.com. That's our website, and it has all those resources on it, because we are trying to help businesses from very small businesses to very large businesses, all the common names, Boeing, Bunge, Pfizer, all of those as well. So please look at that website. But again, I like what Mark just said about being innovative. We see that every day with our Innovation District 39 North, as well as the 4 incubators that we manage and own. And, people are trying to come up with creative ideas. And as an organization, we're always trying to come up with creative ideas. And how do we attract federal resources, other investment resources to our region to make St. Louis even better. And so a lot of that, we need data, good data to target where we direct resources to, where we can get the biggest bang for the buck. And we got to make sure everybody is gets a part of the prize, that we are addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion across our region so that everybody participates and everybody wins. And all of that makes our region a better region, makes it a better place that companies want to move to and grow in. So those are the type of things that we're trying to work on.
That's great. Well, sadly and quickly, we've come to the end of our time together. And I'm sorry we didn't get to a few of the questions, but we certainly appreciate the participation by Henry and Rodney and Mark and Joe. And of course, all of you that are out in cyberspace that have attended today's panel. We appreciate that. And we wish everybody the best. Stay safe. And thanks again for attending today's panel meeting. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Steve.